All right. I am told that I am unmuted, which means that we are ready to come together again. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Lilian, and I'm a member here at Riverside, and am a counselor in the community. I graduated from Covenant in about 1998 and have been counseling since then. So it's just a pleasure to be with all of you today, and we're talking today about beauty and blind spots, how to better discern ourselves with so many versions of vi- or attention, which is a real so there's a lot we won't talk about, and so please feel free to ask questions. This is I was It's been fun for me to prepare this because I think I deal with a lot with identity in a lot of ways. As myself, as a mom. Um, and then as a counselor, and I think a lot of times when we're counseling, we're dealing with identity, even if that's not what we're saying we're dealing with. We're still dealing with our sense of self, even if maybe that's not why the person came. That's what's coming up. And so, but it's been, I don't know that I've always thought about it as coherently and as specific to this as I would have liked. So this has been helpful for me too. And I also say that to say, I'm not saying like, oh, I have this figured out. Like this has really been a learning experience for me too. And so a lot of what I'm going to share, in fact, almost all of it, has been informed either by Zach's teaching or by a wonderful book by Alan Noble called We Are Not Our Own. And Mark mentioned it a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Oh, you don't need to take time to read it," but I did, and it's really, really good. And then the other book is Beyond Identity by Dick Keyes. And I made for you just a super general outline. And I apologize, it's also in really tiny print, which really annoys me now that I'm in my 50s, and I'm so sorry, but that's how it came out, and I wasn't able to fix it. So if you want to email me for one that's in legible print for regular people, I'll be happy to send you that. But anyway, let me pray for us, and then we'll start. Father, thank you so much for this time together. Thank you that in a confusing world, we don't uh, we don't have to invent everything ourselves. We don't have to figure everything out ourselves. I thank you that there are ancient ways. I thank you that you are unchanging. I thank you that you love us. Pray that you would use this time, and I pray that it would be helpful in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're kind of given in our cultural moment, our title is Beauty and Blind Spots. I think we're given a lot of opportunities to express and celebrate and experience the beauty that we have as people, right? Good, uh, we're given relationships, we're given talents, we can perform, and certain things that we're given that we can't change, right? Like maybe our ethnicity, what country we're born into, what our family is. And I think we're also living in a culture that kind of makes sometimes a lot of those things where maybe we don't need to, and maybe sometimes doesn't make enough of those things. And I think it gets confusing for us that we have these good things, but we kind of want to make them the ultimate thing, right? And so we're given good gifts, but we kind of want to just plant our anchor in those things, and that's not always super helpful, um, leading to the blind spot portion, right? Like we have our blind spots of either making a good thing the ultimate thing, as Tim would say, or kind of leaning into our fallenness. I think we're in a culture now that, particularly for younger people, I think there's kind of a lot of pressure to have a diagnosis and to have a story of trauma that we've come through, and there's like some goodness in the origins of that. That now we're in a place where we can talk about those things, but when we're grabbing for an identity, we've maybe gone so far over, like, oh, we can talk about it, but I actually need that to fit in, and so we're kind of in this just topsy turvy mess that we find ourselves in. And so today, I'm talking mostly as a counselor, and so I'm talking to us just as people, and then also for the people that I work with. And I'm curious, how many are counselors? Okay. And how many are ministry leaders? Okay, and other. Okay, I don't. The other things was not how I meant to say that. Serving in other ways. I'm so sorry. That's not what I meant. Okay, it just kind of helps me see. So this will kind of apply for all of us, I think. But I think this idea of our sense of self can come out in a few ways when we're experiencing relationship with people. So one of it is some of us find this place where we're like, I need to find myself. I don't know who I am. I need to find my identity. I'm a parent of teenagers right now. I see them kind of going through this process and figuring out, how are we not like you? How are we like you, but we don't want to be like you, but we can't help it sometimes, and kind of sorting that out. So sometimes we find ourselves in these places that we're thinking like, I need to figure out who I am. And I think our culture talks all about we need to figure out who we are. We're going to talk about that in a minute. It's a big thing. Sometimes we find ourselves in places and we come into counseling and we talk to people because we've lost ourselves. Like this used to be true of me. I used to know this about myself, but then I don't anymore, or I feel like I don't anymore because something changed. I had a tragedy. My career changed. My kids left home. I have a chronic illness. I lost someone important, and it kind of throws it all into question again. So that's another way that might come. And I think that we might come to this question of our sense of self is when we've really done something super wrong that we weren't expecting to do. And Dick Kais talks a bit about like this where sometimes we have moral values and we have God's law, right? And often those coincide, right? But sometimes they don't. But sometimes we end up with a huge sense of shame, and it really rattles our sense of self because we think I didn't think I was this person. Whether that's a momentary thing, I lose my temper with my kids, and I think I didn't think I was someone who said those things, but now I'm someone who said those things to maybe a big thing. We have an affair. We do something we just never thought. And so now we're wrestling with who am I in light of this thing that I have done. So those are kind of the ways that, so we've let down our sense of self. So to me, those are kind of the categories of ways that I see this coming in um, to the conversations that we have with ourselves and with others. And so just for a little simple roadmap through this, because I like simplicity. How many of you have seen Inside Out 2? Okay, good, a good portion. If you have not, we definitely recommend it. You can start with Inside Out 1 if you want, but you don't have to. And if you didn't like Inside Out 2, I'm sorry. I really liked it. But we see kind of this question of our sense of self coming with this movie. So Inside Out 1, we remember our young girl Riley moved from Wisconsin to California. It's very difficult to sort out what that meant for her life and who she was. And Inside Out 2, she becomes a teenager. And as she's becoming a teenager, she finds out that her two best friends are not going to the same high school that she is going to. And so she has to sort out who she's going to be. And also she has to try out for this really competitive hockey team. And it throws everything into just a huge mess. And so we see in Inside Out 2, all of the emotions are trying to help her. And Joy's trying to get to the front and knock everybody else out. And then anxiety is trying to get to the front and drive everybody else out. And all of this is to help Riley get established. And so along the way, she discovers things about herself, but she also does things about that she never thought she'd do. She's mean to her friends. She breaks her own morals. And it's just a really kind of a mess, and she's miserable. She doesn't understand what's happening. So we'll leave for a minute. But part of why she's miserable is she can't discern herself. And so why do we want to even discern ourselves? Right? We're living in this culture where everything is about figure out who you are. So Webster defines self as our element of body, emotions, thoughts, and sensations that contribute to the individuality and identity. So it means we're an object of contemplation. We're our own person. So it's kind of what we're thinking. What is our sense of who we are? And I think as Christians, we have like another layer to this kind of quandary. And this is something that Alan Noble talks about really well in his book. We are not created initially for this exact world. And so he gives this example in his book, which is very moving, talking about if you've ever watched lions at the zoo and they kind of pace. And part of why they pace, it's called zoochosis, I think, is they're lions. They're not meant to be in the zoo. And even if you're born in captivity, the next generation lion might pace a little bit less, because maybe he didn't experience it. But the fact of the matter is they're having to learn to live in a world that is not what they're created for. And he makes that comparison to what we are trying to do. We are trying to discern our sense of self in a world that is broken and fallen and set up against us in many ways. And here we are, which is why I'm thankful for Zach's reminder that didn't just become true this year. This path has been walked before. But I think that's another layer of the challenge that we're all feeling, right? So when we're not Christian, we're still feeling this. We just don't have the language or the way to understand it. And so I think our culture deals with it in a particular way that I also think we inadvertently adopt as Christians. So if you Google finding yourself or being yourself or identity, there are a million ways to help you find, discover, and become your quote authentic self. What that precisely means is a little bit up for grabs, but we know that we want to really be our authentic self, right? We don't want to be constrained by what we've been taught or what our culture says or our other obligations. Like there's this thing within us that we want to find. And we're free to create ourselves at any moment. So we can incorporate our gender, our political affiliation, our ethnicity, our religion, our family. But if those constrain us, we can change them. We can try something different. This is kind of ours to create. And so I have a love-hate relationship with Instagram. And I think it's not, sometimes it's an okay counselor, I guess, for small things, but it's not great. But I always like to see what it's saying. So on Instagram, if you look at identity, you find some things that are true, right? Our brains have neuroplasticity. We can learn new ways of being things. Well, what that means in the Instagram world is you can quote wash yourself into a new identity. So you can change the way you think and you can become more how you want to be. And there's some goodness to that and some truth to that, right? Like we really can change the way we think and make some really helpful improvements. So I'm not throwing that out. But it is interesting that the pressure that we have with that. You can also grow out of your identity. So maybe you had an identity, but then you found it didn't fit, like a costume or a piece of clothing. And so now you're kind of without an identity until you create a different one. But it's okay because there are coaches who can help you. Or I found something called an identity shift mentor who can help you. And this identity shift mentor also is the creator of neuromagical manifestation. Not entirely sure what that is, but I know that a piece of it is that she helps you, I think really helpfully, like I'm sure some of what this person does is really, really helpful. She helps you kind of process things in your body, remove that trauma, so that you can become who you want to be. Now, this all sounds kind of exhilarating and freeing in one sense, right? Like I can be who I want to be. I don't have to be constrained by things. If I have trauma, I can work it out of my body and become this new person. I can have a mentor. But it also shows a couple of things to me. If we take God out of the picture, we're going to look for something, whether that's an identity mentor or whatever. Like we're just made to look to something outside ourselves. And our identity inherently encompasses relationships with other people. And so we can throw that out all day long, but we're just going to put something else in there. And that's really what this kind of illustrated to me. And it's just a lot of pressure because, and Dick Keyes really points this out in his book, if we create our sense of self exclusively with no help from anyone before or after us, that feels exhilarating. We can be what we want to be, but we have to make everything. We have to make our own morals. We have to define what's good. We have to make up our own significance. There's no way to get that. We have to make it up. And anything is an option. And that's not really great after you sit with it for a while. Like it feels good in the beginning. It sounds good. It makes fun Instagram posts. I did not mean for all of my illustrations to be Disney. I do enjoy Disney and the arts, but a few years ago we took our kids to Disney World, and I don't know, have any of you ever seen the castle that they do the laser light show? Yeah, it's amazing. So they put this beautiful laser light show on the castle, and it's amazing. And there's animation coming, and there's songs, and when we jump on a star, it makes no difference who we are. Our heart desires will come to us, and the truth is within us. We can find this magic within us, and we can express it, and it is breathtaking. So I'm sitting with my son by the crowd. We got separated from the rest of our family, so it's just my son and I were sitting there. And he goes, "Mom, I think this is one of the most beautiful things we'll probably see." And I was like, "I think it is too." And do you know we don't believe this? Like what it's saying is not actually what God says about us at all. But it was so beautiful, and so there was a real beauty in the goodness that God's given us to be able to create, to express, all of that is lovely. But it's running this narrative that's just, it's not what God teaches. And so I think that's the quandary we find ourselves in, is even as Christians, like there's some wonderful things that we find with being able to create our own identity. But mostly it just wears us out. And that's where we get to, okay, how do we talk with ourselves? How do we talk with so Dick Keyes, who has the book Beyond Identity, says that the word identity literally means absolute. Comes from the same root as identical. And when it's used psychologically, it refers to a self-statement, an internal cohesion and self-respect. So it's not like finding a shoe or a glove. It's found rather in living in the midst of a constantly changing inner and outer world and growing in a sense of peace with oneself and with God and with other people. As such, it's a continual process of housekeeping, consolidation, and organization. And he goes on further to talk about the building blocks that he sees that go into this. And he names heroism, so the things that we look to. He names our moral convictions, go into making up our identity, our agency or our dominion, the things that we have control over and connect, and our love, not only our capacity to be loved, but our capacity to love. So he kind of takes these building blocks, right? So what we've got a lot of times is we're trying to think about this question maybe without those building blocks or without those norms. Um, and I think that's what our culture is trying to do. Like if we are completely our own, then we have to figure all of that out. Um, and what we like about that is that if we are completely our own, there are theoretically no limits. I think maybe we hit more limits in some ways, but there's theoretically no limits, right? If we belong to someone, there's limits. And Alan Noble says, the question is to whom we belong. If we belong to ourselves, then we set our own limits, which means we have no limits except our own will. If we belong to God, then knowing and abiding in his limits enables us to live as we were created to live, the human life designed us to be. We must be careful. It's not the limits we're accepting, but also God. So, but if we accept, and so for our purposes of today, I'm talking to those of us who have accepted this or are wrestling with accepting this. I think we all have our days. Um, we also have significance. We have love. We have purpose. We're not scrambling to create that. That has been given to us. And as Zach has been in the book of Jeremiah, a number of things have been given to us that we can begin to look to, right? First and foremost, the character of God and the person of Jesus, right? So we have this message that we don't need to imitate anybody because we're all unique as we image Jesus. That is how we are most free, and that's the part that we kind of wrestle with, and I think we overcomplicate. And I think that our culture, and myself as well, kind of has shiny object syndrome with that, right? Like we have this, and we're like, okay, Jesus has given me significance, he's given me meaning. I can look to his character, I can look to godly people in my life and my community and authors to help me see clearly the character of Jesus. I can see his creation, but also I my anchor into how well my kids are doing. And also I need to sink my anchor into how successful I am. And also I need to sink my anchor into having a beautiful minimalist home that could go on Instagram. And we just kind of are just like all these things. And then it takes us away from, I think, what's available to us and what's actually kind of hard enough to get through, honestly. Like this is great news, but we have to work through it, right? And so I think that's the one end is we have this like shiny object syndrome. We don't take our identity. I think the other end of that spectrum, like I said, I kind of think of it as performance and pathology, right? Like we want to sink our anchor in our performance. Um, yes, Jesus, you love me. You bought me with a price. I'm not my own. And I need to be all these things. Or, yes, you love me. You bought me. I'm your own. But I'm going to take on the problems of my life would be so burdened by those that it's hard for me to think what my identity would be without them. Right? And it's complicated, right? Because those things do shape our identity. You know, there are things that happen that we don't come back from in the way that we were. That's really true. And there's a way that we can do that, that keeps us kind of grounded in our identity or that gets us back. I mean, this may just be me. I feel like I get off track. And so I have to be back. And I think sometimes I know I'm going off track and I feel no willfulness. And sometimes I feel like I figure out I'm off track when something happens and I figure out the way in which I'm devastated. Um, that hmm, I guess that was maybe more where your anger was in than you. Um, so I think it can come kind of both of those ways. Um, so what I want us to think about, are there questions about that? I'm going to switch to something a little more pragmatic, but are there questions or thoughts just as we're thinking about that? Mhm. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yes. That is a fabulous question. And I'm gonna say something from Dick Kai's, and then I'll say something myself. So so, and you were right, that was my next point, was what we're gonna say from Dick Kai's. So he says, "In Jesus' life, you see excellence itself, human excellence. No one ever restrains themselves by imitating him. Ultimate freedom is there because as we imitate him, we become more the individuals we were created to be, leaning toward glory that only we in our own individuality would express." So we don't think it kind of practically with clients, and this is specifically with Christian clients, but I don't think of it really differently with clients who don't profess Christ. They're still we are created in the image of God, and that means that we have certain dignity. We have certain worth. We have certain significance. That is true whether we feel it or not. That is true whether we're acting like it or not, because God has said that. And we are created to live in certain ways that God has kindly laid out for us that involve relationship, that involve looking to Him, that involve looking to Jesus. Um, and that because our identity does shift some over time, right? Like we're always thinking about it. Like I'm me from when I was 5, but a lot of things are different. And I don't as much want to join the circus now. But there was something that God had given me in terms of the beauty of the circus and flying through the air, right? And so I think coming back to that we can look to Jesus, that we can look to God as everything shifts, things shift our whole lives. That's kind of how I think about it. So when I'm talking to someone, when I'm talking to myself, but we're not as good. I mean, I'm not as good as talking to myself. I need to talk to someone else usually, um, but that's kind of how I think about it. That there are some givens that we can't escape, and that when we try to escape them, we get into trouble. Does that answer your question? Um, And I really do like the building blocks that Dick Price has out for us to think about. The idea of heroism, like who am I looking to? Certainly Jesus is a hero, our ultimate hero, but there are others in our lives. Abraham Lincoln, what he said. There are those, and so who am I looking to? Because I do think we become like what we gaze on. That's why we're given so many instructions about what we should gaze on. And so our moral convictions are really important to think through. They make up who we are. That's maybe what doesn't. Maybe we go into a profession or a situation that nothing about it balances our moral convictions, right? It shouldn't. Maybe we're in a political party that not everything fits with our moral convictions, right? And so then the question becomes, how do we live that way rather than having to give up everything to join that, which is, I might say, different from how our culture preaches it. Our culture preaches it that you're going to stand alone because you're going to be true to yourself and you don't have to take on these other things. But we can think about it, Jesus, is that we may sometimes stand alone. I mean, Jeremiah was pretty alone, but God was with him. He was in the path, walking as he was created to be. And I think that's where it's different. Is we may have to stand firm and alone-ish, but we have the Lord with us. And then agency. I think we have things that we are given jurisdiction over, and we have things that we aren't given jurisdiction. And the thing that I think we are taught, even as Christians, is that when we see a limit, it is our job to overcome it, push through it, make that not true. We don't know as many things about how do you just go ahead and live a full life that God has called you to with chronic pain or with a loved one lost or with an important person to you or with a mental illness. Like we have, I think, a good capacity for agency that God's given us, right? That we want to improve things and put things right. Where we go off the rails with that is then we think, well, I don't need to accept anything. Anything that comes my way, it's my job to push through it. And sometimes I think if we're going to say that God's sovereign, we might be wanting to ask, how do I live with this set of givens that I am living in? And our capacity to give and receive love. And that's another one I think, as we have rightly helped people try to determine their boundaries, uh, we have, and when I say we, I mean our culture, but also mental health. Like we have really been like, we want to help people, have their boundaries and not be abused, and we want people to be not trapped in unhealthy relationships. And those are really good, solid things that I think the Lord would agree with. But I think we've kind of gone off the rails and we've forgotten to help people think about like, who are you called to love? When do you sacrifice? When you're in a relationship that maybe isn't personally fulfilling, but this person is before you and you're going to need to learn to live in a way that cares for them. I think we've kind of just brushed those questions off the table. And that is concerning for me. And that is a challenge for me to always keep in mind. Because often when we're talking with one person in ministry or in counseling, we see that person, we don't see the system, but God has made us in the system. And so I think that's kind of a consistent challenge for me as well. So I have just some gentle questions, and I listed 8 on your worksheet. And because I am an external processor, I actually have 13. So sorry about that. But these are just some things that I think we can begin to ask ourselves and that we can begin to ask the people that we're walking with to maybe help us ascertain how we're doing with this discerning our sense of self. And so one is what we're looking to is what we're looking to. Does that look like God? And that can happen in a number of ways. But and if what we're looking to does not look like God, or if what we're entering does not look like God, if it's not full of steadfast love, justice, faithfulness, patience, it's not full of those things, but we are called to be there. How do we look like Jesus in those places? So it's not as simple as, oh, if it doesn't look like God, don't go there. I mean, you might be going there, but how are you then going to live, and how are you going to discern who are you in the midst of that? A very silly, tiny example. We got to go to New York this weekend, which was super fun, and I'm a big theater nerd, so it was amazing. But at the end of the show, you can quote stage door, and you can go out the back and wait for the actors to come. They don't promise to come, but they could. And but what I thought was interesting is I think you could argue that there are a few things about Broadway that are amazing and show how incredible God is. And there's some things about the culture that you might say, I think that's maybe not Christ-like. But the lead from the show that there were 3 leads, one came out. And it was so interesting to me, just his humility, his patience. There was a huge line of people. He went through each one. He brought someone that could take a picture with him. There was a whole high school choir there, which was almost more fun to watch than the star. He moved the barricades so he could take a picture with all of them. And it was just such a cool picture to me of him kind of living differently from how you might expect in this. And he's just it was a Saturday. He's done 2 shows with this mind-blowing voice but he had this humility and this people are important and how I interact with people is important. And again, I'm not saying the people who didn't come out didn't have that. I'm just saying that when I watched him come out, that really stood out to me, that he is behaving differently. And I don't know, his name was Nicholas Christopher. I don't know his faith orientation, but it was a beautiful example to me. The second thing I think we can think about, what are we claiming is most true about ourselves? A lot of things are true. Often Zach will remind us what is most true about us is that we were created to be loved, cherished, cared for. And I think I drift from what is most true. Our clients, the people we minister, drift from what is most true. And so I think that can be a helpful kind of question. Um, can we receive the significance we're already given, or are we striving to create that significance? And sometimes that I don't know that we always even ask that question like that, but that's what we're listening for, right? Because we're all trying to do things and accomplish things in the world, and that's not bad. But where are we really putting our anchor? Are we doing that from a place of I have significance already, or are we doing that from a place of I have to create this? Um, can we take our angst about our significance and accomplishments to God, or do we have to like keep drumming up things we're doing to deal with that? Because I think it's human nature in our sin nature. Like, yeah, I strive and I try to do all kinds of stuff by myself. It's a terrible idea. When I figured that out, because God shows me, a person shows me, when our clients we love figure that out, can we just go to God like, yeah, that's what we do. Jesus paid for that. Can we bring that back? Um, can we live as forgiven people when our shame and our guilt do line up, right? When we really have done wrong things. Can we wrestle with the shame we have, which is not legitimate? A lot of times we have shame for what we look like, for the fact that we tripped, for the fact that we can't do math in our head, whatever it is. And we take that shame that's illegitimate. And so can we wrestle with that and try to move away from that? Um, can we find what is most true of us in different seasons of life? I think sometimes we maybe have to go back to that when we go through big changes. Like, okay, what I thought was true isn't. I can't lean on that anymore. So how do we come back? How do we ask each other, like, hey, what's most true? What are you leaning into right now? Um, can we find what's most true even in the hard seasons? And I think it's that coming back to what Zach talks about, that ancient story. And so a lot of times that means a lot of listening to what is actually going on in the current hard season, right? These are kind of underpinning questions, so we're not hearing someone say, I lost a loved one, and we come with what's most still true about you. Obviously, we're listening, we're walking, but we have an ear towards, is there a way that I can gently remind them what is most true? Is there a question I can ask to help call them into that? Um, can we lean into the ancient tools we've been given? I think that's another one we kind of just don't think about, like, oh, prayer, reading our Bible, Christian mentors, people who've come before us. Like, we have these tools that we've been given, and I think sometimes we just think those are trite or we don't lean into them. Um, number 11, how can we imitate Christ? Like, when we can't think what to do, how can we look to Jesus? And if we can't think how we can look to Jesus, how can we look to someone who reminds us of Jesus? I went through a really hard season in my life, and things would happen, and I was just messing it up really bad with one of my kids. Just everything I did was just all of it was not working and bad. And so I had a really wonderful, godly older woman, and I just started to think, how would she respond right now? And I would respond like that, and it would usually go better. And over time, I could work it out. But that is a gift from God to put a godly person that we can actually look to, which is a really different message from our culture of like, you just need to figure out what's true to you and how to be a true parent and all that. Like, okay, maybe, but mostly you need to think about how to image God. And if we're just stuck, God has given us people. Um, and then what work is there for us to do? That's the agency part of Dick Kai's that I think we lose too. I think a lot of times part of why we're all hung up is we're trying to be our true selves without, like, disconnected from, like, what are the good works we're called to do? And by that, I don't even mean like big. Our Zach always says our culture wants us to do big things faster. I don't even mean that. I mean, like, what are we called to do today? What are we? What does God put before us? How can we do that well? I think that is a burden, but often it helps us get through these difficult seasons of life because maybe I can't think of exactly who I am or exactly why life still has purpose. I do know that I'm gonna have to feed the cat, the kids need to go to school, that I have clients who need me to show up and pay attention to them, and that's a gift. I think sometimes we push it against it, like, that's not really what we need, and maybe sometimes, and I'm not saying, of course, sometimes we need breaks. I'm not saying, like, just grit and do it, but I am saying sometimes that is a kindness of God to come back to ourselves that, "Hey, I've made you on purpose. Here it is." Um, and certainly the role of repentance is really important. Because sometimes I know I'm miserable. I just haven't repented. And, you know, God's kind of miserable. When we're walking with people, that's a little harder, right? Because we can't just be like, repent. That doesn't work. But we can be gently sort of helping people talk about, could this look different? How is this functioning? Um, and so we started with Riley, whose identity was all in a quandary, just doing things that she didn't believe. And so at the end of the movie, all of her emotions are gathered together, and they're talking about her. And these are several different emotions, but I'm just going to read it straight through. They're talking about Riley, and they say, "I love our girl. How could you not? She's super smart and great at hockey. She's really creative. She can be bored, but never boring. But she can be a little sarcastic from time to time. She can have really bad ideas. Occasionally, she can do the wrong thing. And sometimes she's hard on herself. But every bit of Riley makes her who she is. And we love all of our girl, every messy, beautiful piece of her." So obviously, that's Disney. But I thought it was a beautiful, smaller picture of the Lord's care for us. He knows we have really bad ideas. He knows we're sarcastic. He knows we're hard on ourselves. He's been kind to make us good at some things. Uh, and we can actually live with all of that reality. We don't have to panic because, like, I have really bad ideas. I don't have to panic. I also have a God who has shown me paths that will not abandon me when I have my really bad ideas. Um, Zach is always careful to remind us, like, Jesus doesn't affirm everything about us. He also doesn't condemn everything about us. He works to find our dignity. And I think that's really important in finding our sense of self because we've been off the rails, um, particularly after one of my bad ideas. I'll go off the rails. And so that's part of why I love that movie is it gives us just a little human example that even kids can see of this position that we have, not with our emotions, but with the Lord, which is much better. Um, so with that, we do have some time for questions. I was just kind of hoping to give us a little bit of a sense of kind of where our culture takes us, where we go off the rails, and some questions that might undergird our interactions with people. Like I said, it's not a list of things I would necessarily say to someone. I might say them to myself because I don't have to be around much with myself as much, but with people, it's what we're listening for, I think, as we interact. It's what we've got. But questions that you may have. Yes. Mhm, mhm, mhm. Um, I haven't given as much thought to like why God made us that way, but I do think um, you kind of see throughout the Bible direction about where we're to look, whether that's to notice the beauty of creation, to notice how the birds don't strive, to follow the cloud and fire. And I think it's partly because we look to something. And so if we don't look to God, we're going to replace it with something else. And I think that what we're finding in our culture and then what I find in myself is that what I'm looking at most, I start to try to conform myself to that. So I think that's part of how we're getting some of the polarization that we have politically is that we're looking to that maybe for really helpful reasons because this is a way we think we can improve the world. But we keep looking at it, we keep getting farther in, and then we can't see the other things. I see that sometimes when certain um, certain artistic scenes or music scenes. I think there can be beauty and good things in them, but the longer we look, the more there's kind of that nihilistic nothing matters. So that's kind of what I mean. Like we just start to notice that we're taking some of those things on, which also in a good way, right? Like if we're hanging out with godly people or we are with people, uh, who remind us of what is true, then we begin to look more to that. that kind of makes sense. Okay. It's a great question. Other questions?
My daughter has
Mhm.
recommended that Rob and I read, what's it called, Vulgar Parts, or Good Parts.
Oh,
How bad are they?
yes.
Anyway, there's we have believers an idea that has
Mhm.
simple, and the culture is, I think, offering us something that's good,
Mhm.
and you know, and so I don't want to just reject that idea.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just wondering, and my counselor, who is wonderful, makes me feel like I don't have any bad parts when he's
Mhm.
talking to me,
Mhm.
so I know he does.
Mhm.
So I'm just trying,
Mhm.
pastorally, as we're,
Mhm.
you know, pastoring one another,
Mhm.
as we're offering grace and
Mhm.
kindness.
Mhm.
I think there's something helpful in that. Um, can you just, I'm just trying to integrate,
Mhm.
as a believer, as a father, as a friend,
Mhm.
as a husband,
Mhm.
um, how to integrate just that idea,
Mhm.
in light of our
Yeah.
sinfulness.
Yeah. I think that is a great question. I think that is a great question. And it's something even I kind of sometimes wrestle with as a counselor. I think the book you're referencing, No Bad Parts, is an IFS model, maybe internal family
There's
systems.
another one that similar.
Okay, so I think that's internal family systems. I work a lot from a model called emotionally focused therapy, which is a behavioral model, by the way. But in all of those, our premise, which I think aligns with our faith, is that we make sense. We do things for reasons, and many of them are reasons that we are trying to connect with other people, and we do that in all sorts of wonky ways. Um, and so I think a lot of times we're creating safety in that sense that all of it is okay. And I think it's a way we can give it to Christ that we don't have to feel shame when we come to Him. In a counseling model, I think you may go at it at some point with, um, does this line up with what we see? It's some question that gently pushes the person towards, is this sin or not? Who are we relying on? I think when they do that, I kind of think of it, and this isn't right or wrong, it's just how I think of it, as kind of earning the right to get there. And I think we need a lot of safety and acceptance to get there, and then sort of we do get to enter in. I think, years ago, have you guys heard of nouthetic counseling? Okay, so and there were wonderful things about it, not bashing it, but one of the challenges of it was I think it had sometimes it had a premise, like, if we just tell you that this is sinful, it will change. And, it doesn't usually. It's the process of that that feeling like you feel with your counselor, like, "You don't have any bad parts, we can talk about this, we can bring this to the light." But I think that as we bring it to the light, either it comes up by the Holy Spirit ourselves, or maybe that's where we do get to have the discussion, or we have a gentle confrontation like the ones that Zach is so good at teaching us to have. Does that does that answer your question? Okay. But it's a good question, and I wrestle with it all the time. And I talk with, one of the counselors I supervise about it too, because a lot of these models that are super helpful and great don't have really a concept of a sin nature. And so we are kind of left with like, well, what do we do with that? But I think sometimes pragmatically in the counseling room, we don't have to do a ton with it. We know it, but to me, that informs like how I interact with them and where I think health might lie. So, other questions? Hmm. Hmm.
One of them,
Hmm.
okay, you're finding like your sense of self, or
Hmm.
um, like you're doing one
Hmm.
and your setbacks.
Hmm.
Um, and so we've gotten to that point of like, okay, you notice when this
Hmm.
happens, like
Hmm.
your mood is so tied to how you're doing work,
Hmm. Hmm.
and you're more than that. You're more
Hmm.
than your work.
Hmm.
But yeah, have you found helpful ways or helpful directions to point clients when like maybe there's some openness to spirituality, but there's not much background there,
Yeah.
and even would you almost like present different um, different options and sets? Like, okay, some people believe in the universe. Like,
Yeah.
Sort of like how do you see the universe, or like
Right.
what you know.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and another one that I think I wrestle with too. So some things that I find helpful, and some of it is a little bit client dependent, right? Like some things might work well with one person and less with another. But I think there's kind of three things that I tend to lean on. One is as you notice a person is leading with maybe tying their sense of self to performance, but also means tying their sense of self to outcomes, which often means they don't have control over anything. And so sometimes helping them see, is there something internal that they can think about, such as have they acted according to their values? Have they done what is important? I know we can also say maybe that feels a little behavioral, but I feel like it gets them closer to like, is there a meaning that you're living out of that when you live out of that meaning, you can be aware of? So that might be one way. And sometimes I might ask questions around like, how do you make sense of, how do you make sense of your worth as a person? Some people do have some background. And so sometimes I might say that, where do you draw your sense of meaning? I might ask are there practices that remind you? I might ask that. I also sometimes might ask how they would advise someone they love, because typically that is a much more loving, gracious way to think about it than what they're telling themselves. So like they might say that, but they might very naturally say to their kid, well, you're valuable because you're you and no one else is like you, or whatever they feel. But they can access it when it's not about themselves. So that's kind of those are kind of three things that I think about. But if others have others, I'm happy to hear. This is all day long we walk with this. So have others found ways that you talk to people that it's helpful?
I guess is the challenge that person is not Christian, you're the counselor. You're not a pastor. So
Yes.
You can't say Jesus, but you're supposed to be a sounding board.
Yes.
And so how do I communicate who they are in the line of God without communicating who they are without?
Yes, in the licensed professional counseling world. Yes, like if I'm just out being a person or I'm the pastor, I can, or if the clients ask me. Like a lot of my clients know I'm a Christian, even if they're not. So like if they ask, I feel like that's great. But yes, you're right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how about pastors? How do you do it? Because you get to go straight there. How do you guys help people with that are not Christians?
Can you remind us of
the question is when people who are not Christians have the awareness to notice, hey, I'm rooting my identity in something that's actually shaky. I can't root my identity in my work performance. My grades. So we started talking about like if we're professional counselors and we're not invited necessarily to share overtly about the Lord, how do we do that? I'm curious for some of you who are in positions where you are invited to do that, how you bridge that. Yeah.
Sometimes I'll use language of that he's not he's not creating something new that's never been seen before out of nothing. What the enemy's doing is taking something good. He's twisting or he's distorting.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's shifting the focus from that which is good and beautiful and lovely to this other thing and elevating it as ultimate.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so like it's kind of like the hook. This is a good thing, but as soon as we've made that thing ultimate, that's where the distortion or that's where the perversion comes in.
Yeah.
And so
that makes a lot of sense.
My work or my spouse or how others view me and has become the ultimate mirror for how I view myself.
Yes.
And it's an incomplete view.
Yes. Yeah. No, that tracks. That makes a lot of sense. And that reminds me, actually, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's really helpful and respectful of where the person is and what they're experiencing, while also kind of inviting them to go a little further. Which I love about it. It reminds me also sometimes even with non-Christian clients, and this gets like indirectly at identity, we do have to talk about how can life be worth living even without this thing? Like, how can life still be worth living even if your career failed? Or even if, like, whatever they're coming to me with that we're not gonna change. We do have to start to answer the question, how can and there are models that ask that very specifically, like within the model of the counseling, but even just in regular therapy, we and that can kind of sometimes get to where is your identity, because we're having to say, like, if it can't be this thing we wanted it to be, where can it be? Yes,
Oh, sorry.
I am. Yeah. No, you can ask whatever question you want.
Well, I'd like to hear how people describe their story, tell their story. Most of the people that are around that aren't at my church that I interact with, Christian people, post-Christian. And so I just like to hear how they describe their story, and then after I hear it for a while, it's, so I'm hearing you describe your journey as this is the journey that you're on, and I'll just ask, how is that journey, how your family is peace or whatever the thing,
I like that too. Yeah.
discern longing, discern narrative, and it starts a long conversation. I'm a terrible evangelist. I'm just trying. I'm trying to draw out this long-term relationship and narrative and longing, and at some point subvert what they're doing and thinking and show Jesus is what they're really after. Yeah. That's my secret mission.
Yeah.
But anyway,
that doesn't sound terrible at all to me. That sounds really helpful.
I'm trying to say, what's your
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that sounds really helpful. I think that's a great way to think about it. That again, again, meeting people where they are, seeing what the longings are too. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I see. We're good. I was just, yeah, great. So thank you. Yeah, we were just asking questions so we're free to stop. I'm around if anybody has questions. Thanks. I think I turned it off.